Welcome back to the Peach Teach English podcast. I'm Frankie Mesmer, your host, and today I'm going to share my language study tips with you. And I know that you will learn some valuable information to help you with your English studies. So let's get started with the beginning of my language journey. So at the moment, guys, I speak English, Spanish, Portuguese, some French, and I'm learning Turkish. So I have a lot of experience in studying a foreign language. The first foreign language I ever studied was actually French. At my high school, we only had to do 2 semesters of a foreign language. And at my school, there was French or Spanish. And I chose French. And so I did 2 semesters in 9th grade, and I really wasn't that interested in learning a language at that time. So I did the bare minimum to get my A in the French class. And then when I finished the second semester, I never tried to learn French again until recent years. So I studied 3 more years at high school and had nothing to do with foreign languages. When I was 18 years old, I went to Nicaragua, and I didn't speak any Spanish, and it was very frustrating. I really enjoyed my trip there, experiencing the culture. The people were very kind. The food was absolutely delicious. And I really just fell in love with Latin culture. But I was just frustrated that I couldn't communicate with any of the people. And so when I went back to the US, I didn't really know what I wanted to study at university. The only thing I knew is I wanted to be fluent in Spanish and return to Latin America. So at university, I signed up for beginner Spanish classes. And little by little, I realized how much I loved studying a language and being able to communicate with people in their native language. And I was so dedicated to learning Spanish that I really tried to immerse myself in the language as much as possible. So I started listening to bachata, merengue, salsa, just kind of more pop, also reggaeton. I'd get in my car and I'd listen to Spanish music all the time. Also, I joined the HOLA organization at my university, which stands for Hispanic Outreach and Leadership Association. Basically, it's a group where Hispanics or Latinos come together and they do different activities there on the college campus. And so I became a member of that club. And anytime they were doing an event, I was there. And this was an opportunity for me to hear more Spanish and make friends that I could practice with. And joining that association, I made a lot of friends, and 5 of them became my roommates, and all of them come from Mexican heritage. Of course, we would speak English most of the time, but when I needed help with my Spanish homework or I wanted to practice communicating in Spanish, I would do that with them. And it was really useful for my language journey. Another thing I did is, at that time of my life, I was very religious. So I went to Hispanic church Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, and Wednesday nights. So 3 times a week, I was listening to like 1 hour, 2 hour services in Spanish, interacting with the members in Spanish. On Sunday afternoons, we'd usually have a meal together, so I would interact with them in Spanish there too. And I was listening to the language so much. And in the beginning, I didn't understand what was going on, but little by little, they tried to speak Spanish to me more, and I was able to understand more. Basically, my first tip for you guys is really try to immerse yourself in the language and culture as much as possible. I do recognize that there's a large Spanish-speaking population in the US, so this was easy for me to do. This might not be as easy for you to do where you live with English, but look for it. And if you can't do it face to face, we have the internet. Virtually, you can put yourself in situations where you're hearing and using English constantly. So now, guys, let's move on to Portuguese. The difference between the way I studied Spanish and Portuguese is I had a very formal Spanish education. It was my major at university. I studied for 5 years with excellent professors, learning grammar, writing, giving presentations. And so I have a very professional level of Spanish. But when I studied Portuguese, French, and Turkish, I didn't use this method. And I don't believe that it's necessary. I think the reason my Spanish is so good today is because of all the different situations I've put myself in to actually use it. Now I live in Colombia and I'm using it day in and day out. It's fresh. I'm hearing native accents and I have to communicate all the time. So that is what I focused on when I started studying Portuguese and continuing into French and Turkish. Now, I'm not saying grammar isn't important at all. I think it is. You want to speak correctly, and grammar is how we organize ideas so that they make sense. But I don't believe you have to focus on grammar as the center of your studies to be able to learn it efficiently. For example, when I was learning French and Turkish, I would message language partners. And using the translator, I was saying many things in the past tense. And they were saying things to me in the past tense. And using that translator, I started to notice the pattern of the endings added to these verbs. And I went, ooh, that's how you form the past tense. So I started trying to use it. And then my language partner corrected me saying, Frankie, you're close, but sometimes you're doing it wrong. This is what you need to do. But I was actually able to identify the past tense structure pretty well. And then with the help of a language partner, I could fix it and do it correctly. And I did this with French and Turkish. So you don't really need to prioritize the grammar in order to learn it. What's key is that communication, right? What happens with many schools is they teach you the grammar. It's like, hey, use the past tense. And you can do it correctly because they're telling you right now to use it. But in your real life, when it's time to use the correct grammar, your brain gets all confused and you're not sure which is the right one to use. And that's why the communicative approach can actually be more effective because you're learning this grammar in a practical way, which also means it'll stick in your memory better. So, guys, let me talk about how I studied Portuguese, French, and Turkish. So, the first thing I did is I got on Hello Talk. You can also use an app called Tandem. And Basically, these are apps where you find language partners. And the reason I recommend getting a language partner is because it can be complicated to have an official English class every day. But with a language partner, you can add them to your contacts. I use WhatsApp and I message them every day. Hey, how are you? What did you do today? And you begin to make friends that speak this language that you're trying to learn. And they teach you about the slang, they teach you about the culture and new vocabulary, the pronunciation. But naturally, they're not actually teaching it. You're just using it, right? You're reading those words. You're typing those words. And you realize what vocabulary you have, what vocabulary you don't have. And when you don't have it, you look it up and then you try to add it to your memory. So I really recommend finding a language partner and try to message them daily if possible. Additionally, I believe it's nice to have a teacher or tutor. So I use italki for Portuguese, French, and Turkish. Once or twice a week, I would do a 30-minute class. There are 4 language skills: speaking, reading, listening, and writing. Through this class, you will practice speaking and listening. And through the messaging, you will practice reading and writing. So you're practicing all skills every week with just these 2 methods. Additionally, you can use real life materials to grow your vocabulary and listening skills. And this is why I have a podcast. This is why I make videos. This is why I write blogs, because you need to practice your reading and listening skills regularly. So what I do is I really like podcasts. So I find a podcast that I like with a transcript. And for example, on Monday, I listen to the podcast. And on Tuesday, I read the transcript looking for new vocabulary. And I will repeat this until I need to. But guys, this way you're practicing listening and reading with just one material. So that's why I make this podcast. And the transcript is on my Substack. But I've also put subtitles here for you so that if that's easier, you have that option as well. But it's important to take a moment to listen and practice that listening, not reading, just practice the listening. And then take the moment for the reading and try to learn new vocabulary. And write that vocabulary in a notebook. You need an English notebook, okay? And whenever you see a new word, write it down. You need to review it. There are many different ways to review. I do have a podcast episode where Sam joined me to talk about ways to remember vocabulary. So you can check out that episode if you want a deeper dive into study tips. But flashcards are a great way. There's an app called Anki app, and you can put in those words and then study them. Because many times, if we don't review the words, we're not going to add them into our long-term memory. Now, with Anki app, I've had some people say, do you have a way where I don't have to manually type in all the words because it's time consuming? There might be some methods, guys, but I question if you should use them. Because when you make the flashcards, it's a form of study. It's a form of reviewing those words. So don't be lazy. make the cards if you're studying when you're making those cards. Now, if you want another good way to practice listening, you can use videos. Many people say use movies, TV shows, which is great if that's what you love. Do it, because that's important. Enjoy the process. But personally, especially in the beginning, I like to start with short videos, maybe something about 2 to 5 minutes long. And as you become more advanced, you can move to 15, 30 minutes. The reason I recommend these types of videos is because they're short and you can repeat them. Since it's very long, it's kind of boring to repeat it. But when it's shorter, you can repeat, which is training your ear. And I do have another podcast about listening tips. So I'm not going to go too big into detail here. But generally, when I study listening, I use podcasts, music, and videos. And when I watch the video, I repeat it and I pay attention to looking for new vocabulary too, always writing it in my notebook. And another thing that I've done is for writing. Now, I still think the language partner is a great way to practice writing regularly. Another way you can practice writing is through something called morning pages. We're not going to call it this because I'm taking the idea from morning pages and changing it to fit language learning. Okay? But basically, the idea is you're going to write one page. And it's not really so much about what are you going to write about. It's just writing, okay? Whatever's in your head, write that on the paper. The reason this is so good is you're teaching yourself how to think in this language, okay? Because we don't want to be translating from our native language to the language we're learning all the time. So I recommend just writing whatever's in your head on that paper so that you can practice writing. And this is a method that I have used, and it's very good for training your brain to think in the language. So guys, let's just make a recap here because I've shared a lot of things with you. My first tip, find a language partner and message them daily to practice reading and writing. Find a tutor that you can speak with weekly. Use real-life materials to practice reading and listening. So you can read articles or books. You can watch videos, movie series. You can listen to music and podcasts. But this way you learn how the language is really used, and it's usually more fun. And that's my last tip, guys. Enjoy the process. My students that have the most success are the ones that are enjoying the process. If studying English feels like a chore or something you have to do, it's going to be more difficult to learn the language and your progress will be slower. But if you find methods that you enjoy, that you get excited about, that's when you'll study more regularly and you'll grow so fast because you're having fun. So if you prefer reading books to reading articles, read books. And if you prefer reading articles, read articles. Okay? If you like music more than movies, then use music. Use the media that you love. Okay? And those are my tips, guys. Do your best to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible and find the methods that you enjoy. I know that there were a lot of great tips here. I'd love for you to share with me What methods get you excited to learn English? What do you use to study English? Perhaps other students can check out the podcasts, YouTube channels, musical artists that you enjoy. So share those with us in the comments. And guys, I make podcast videos, blogs every week, and I offer English classes and a conversation club. In my community, you can practice listening, reading, speaking, and writing every week. And I'd love for you to be a part of the Peach Teach English community. Thank you for listening to this episode, and talk to you next time.